at the forum last night, Trump said he's less trigger happy than Clinton, but he said no more, she said no more substantial numbers of ground forces in Iraq other than the special forces. And he said we should capture and defend Iraq's oil fields. Am I missing something, or not trigger happy and capture and defend Iraq's oil fields are contradictory?
Well, I mean, you cannot ask me as a political scientist to try to defend consistency on the part of Trump's policy descriptions, right? I can't do that. But I think there is a fundamental truth that Trump has been able to get at in a way that establishment Republicans just can't, which is that the 0.1% in the United States and the establishment media and a lot of the intellectual crowd actually have a lot more in common, both in their worldviews and their values, with the top 0.1% in other countries around the world than they do with their countrymen. And Trump is calling BS on that. And once you unpack what the policy recommendations are underneath that, I can tell you some things on foreign policy I think that he says that people ridicule that aren't ridiculous. So for example, when he said, and please don't make it sound like I'm defending him, but I think the anti-establishment point is real. That when he said that, look, if the South Koreans and Japanese don't want to pay more, well, maybe they should just go nuclear. Would that be such a big deal? And Hillary ridicules him. Hillary says, I don't think he even knows what he means in terms of them going nuclear. I think the average American could care less if Japan and South Korea went nuclear, and if it meant that the US was spending less, that would be a good thing. And by the way, I mean, Pakistan's nuclear, right? India's nuclear. North Korea's nuclear. We didn't want that, right? But the idea, I mean, Japan would be one of the most responsible powers in the world with nukes. I don't ex ante think that's a huge problem. I know that they are immensely anti-nuclear. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Fukushima. I mean, that actually brings out lots of Japanese to demonstrate. And they're not people that demonstrate easily, right? It's very homogeneous. They're pretty happy with the establishment. They have basically a one-party functional system. It's okay-ish. You know, but Hillary just demonized him for this.
You have an article on Politico recently that adapts your top 10 political risks of the year format to the top Trump risks. And number one is what you call the bolt from the blue. What does that mean?
That's the thing that worries me the most about Trump becoming president. I'm not someone who believes, first of all, I think it's unlikely he's going to get elected, but he could get elected. We know this. If he got elected, I'm not someone who believes that suddenly, the day after inauguration, the United States loses superpower status. I don't believe that. I think the ability of an individual US president to make significant moves in policy, domestically incredibly constrained, and even in foreign policy. Think about how different Obama is from Bush, and think about how limited Obama's ability to truly move the needle on things he's been passionate about has actually been. And I think that Trump, who is not exactly a hard worker, right? He's not going to want to be in the trenches, right? He's going to want to delegate a lot of stuff. Well, no, I mean, in terms of the conversations his son had with Kasich, for example, it's like, well, you'll be CEO, you'll do domestic policy, you'll do foreign policy, and I'll make America great again.
Right.
That, you know.
Right.
And look, I know a lot of billionaires in this town, hedge fund types, that are voting for Trump because they believe, correctly in my view, that they will have unprecedented access to people with financial and, you know, sort of the inside, you know, the Valerie Jarrett types, right? And that as a consequence, they're going to do really well. I think they're right. I think that is a good venal reason for voting for the president. It's not one I happen to ascribe to, but I understand it, right? And it's one that Putin would get. Now, you asked me two questions.
It is, by the way, the first time that I've heard good and venal used back-to-back like that.
Well, you need to spend more time with hedge fund types.
I guess so.
So, look, the bolt, I can answer the bolt for the blue question or the Putin question?
Bolt from the blue.
Okay, bolt from the blue question. is the thing that really worries me about Trump. Yes, there would be incremental damage to U.S. alliances, to the U.S. dollar, to U.S. trade relations that would be worse under Trump than they would be under Hillary. Although I think the structural effects of geopolitical creative destruction, the unmooring, the driverlessness of, sort of the world politics today actually outweighs either. The thing that really worries me about Trump is, God forbid, Trump elected next 9/11. God forbid. Because where a president really matters is response to crisis. That's where everyone is looking to the US president, and suddenly Congress is like, okay, whatever it takes. You want us to pass $1 trillion in bailout on 2 pages of paper from Hank Paulson and we have no idea what's in there? Fine.
Oh, that'll never happen.
Because we're freaked out, right? And I think that if Trump were president in a time where there was a true crisis, I think you could do really systemic damage to American democratic institutions, to the legitimacy of those institutions.
Because he would seize power, or he would overreact to the crisis?
Either. We don't know. I mean, that's what the bolt from the blue. I mean, yes. I think that's one where, sort of media independence could really take a hit that we couldn't come back to, where the judiciary could become politicized in the sorts of ways that you presently see in Turkey. That could never happen on a day-to-day basis. That would not happen under President Trump in a normal environment. But take Trump and put 9/11 on top of that, or massive cyber attack that brings down the US markets, or things that are now thinkable in a way that a year ago were not thinkable. And I actually worry about the future of American hegemony, supremacy, superpower status, democracy, you name it. So I do worry about that. But by the way, Putin? On your Putin question,
yes.
Putin is a strong leader. And I am on record saying that Putin is the most powerful individual in the world. And he's accomplished that despite the fact that his country is in decline. What does it say about a presidential candidate who believes it's fine to lionize someone who actually actively wants to undermine America's position in the world? That's the real question. What does that say? Because who are the people out there that support Trump right now? I understand why a lot of Americans would want to vote against Hillary. I really get it. But as a foreign policy person, you look at the people that support Trump. It's Putin, it's Orban in Hungary, it's Farage, it's Le Pen, it's Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, it's Kim Jong-un. Are you freaking kidding me? No, but that's, if you care about America's role in the world, now, there are good reasons why many Americans increasingly don't care about America's role in the world, because they say, look, we've cared about it before, it hasn't helped me. And they're right. They're right. And that is an enormous indictment on Washington and the establishment. But if you care about America's role in the world, then it is very clear that Trump is a very bad option.
You also have Trump red herrings in that article, what not to worry about.
Yeah.
And number one is U.S.-China relations. Really? With all that he says, China, 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 China?
Number one, China's not going to take the easy bait. The Chinese understand that working relationships with the United States, because they're getting more powerful over time, they can do incremental. They can just build up their military a little bit more, day by day, month by month. They can do bilateral relations with the Indonesians, the Philippines, the Vietnamese. The long game, as long as they don't screw up their own domestic economy, as long as they don't lose power in terms of the Communist Party, the world is moving towards them. So I don't think that they do not want conflict. The way that the Russians want the Americans to fail, the Chinese actually don't. The Chinese kind of want the system to be stable, just let it keep kind of going in their direction. And they will play more ball. We see it on climate. The Chinese are now doing more in Syria on the humanitarian side. It's from a very low bar, but it's more than it was. Peacekeepers, they're starting to actually, put them into Africa. They weren't doing that before. They put a military base in Djibouti. Why? Because they're concerned about Chinese supply chain. Those are, from a global perspective of stability, those are all marginally constructive things.
Did you also, or could you also, write an article on the top Clinton risks if she's elected president?
Sure, they look very different, obviously.
Where would you start?
It'd be really boring. No, the Clinton risks, the biggest Clinton risk would be for 4 more years, maybe longer, we have a government that is largely captured by a bunch of entrenched interests, big pharma, big finance, the AARP, you know, and as a consequence, you would not be able to really address these growing structural problems around the middle class, the working class. I mean, they'll say it, they'll throw some sops, they'll check the box. It's like when corporations do sustainability. There are a few companies out there that truly care, but most of them are like, okay, we know that we're going to get hit by, you know, sort of all of the demonstrators and the NGOs unless we check the boxes. So we'll check the boxes, you know, financial institutions will check the boxes on diversity. Okay, we're done with that, now let's focus on making money again. The biggest risk with Hillary is that's what she does. Check the box approach towards buying off, you know, sort of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and all the people that had to hold their nose to vote for, and then 4 years later, the structural problems are greater. That is the greatest risk that comes from Hillary. It's a boring risk, precisely because we can get away with it, you know?